Ko whakarau I ke mai raro I tēnei karanga kaupapa o te wā. Hai o te awa puti tua puti wapo I te paki ako o te rākau, o maere nuku o maere raki, o maere o te māra whenua, I ruka tāne, I raro tāne, te raki ihi o tāne, paku paku o tāne, noho ka o te ariki, ho atu e tāne, ki uta. Good afternoon everybody and welcome to our second Pū Kōrero for Coastal People Southern Skies. Ko e Mary Jackson tōku ingoa, no ngā pui Ngāti Whātua, Ngāti Wai, Ngāti Kahu o Whangaroa hau. My name is Anne-Marie and I am one of the co-directors of Coastal People Southern Skies, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our second speaker in our Pū Kōrero seminar series for coastal people, following on within our restoration theme from Associate Professor Rose Richards. We have our second co-theme leader in restoring, Dr. Gaya Gnanalingam, and Gaya is currently a lecturer in the Department of Marine Science at the University of Otago. She is one of our principal investigators in Coastal People Southern Skies, and her project is using cultural keystone species as a focus for restoration, or Pāua, restoring a cultural icon, and one of the projects that have been funded in our restoration theme. And as Gaya's profile says too, she has a background in marine ecology and law and has worked with communities, particularly in a Ngāi Tahu context and others, looking at fisheries species like Pāua and others, and how we can restore our Pāua fishery and many others within our local coastal environments. She has degrees in zoology, law, ecology in her MSc from Otago, and has a doctorate in ecological sciences, Old Dominion University, has undertaken studies, of course, as a Fulbright scholar for her doctorate, very recently completed an MBIE, Vision Mātauranga Placement Fellowship, working alongside Te Rūnanga or Ngāi Tahu, and we're very lucky that she's one of our principal investigators and one of our young emerging stars. So I'll hand it over to you, Gaya, and Gaya will take us through her presentation, and then we can open it up for questions. But I'm sure if you do have any questions, just pop them in the chat for Gaya, and she can answer them along the way. So I'll hand it over to you, Gaya. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Marie. Thanks very much for that introduction. I guess I will share my screen. Oh, how do I do that? Can everyone see that?
Yeah, looks good.
Awesome. All right. Kia ora koutou, ko Gaya tōku ingoa. My name is Gaya, and like Anne-Marie said, I am a lecturer at marine science. I'm here at the University of Otago. And I feel very privileged, I suppose, to be talking to you all today about this project, Pāua Restoring a Cultural Icon, for future generations. I feel like it's one that many people involved with CPSS could speak to. It has a very long history with a number of people associated with the core. And so I feel lucky to be able to, I guess, continue on with this work, I guess, into the next couple of years. So as an introduction, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the species and the research area, but for those of you who are perhaps not as familiar, we'll start, I guess, with the East Otago Taiapuri, which is the main focus point for this research project, but it's not the only one. I should say this project does have a little bit of a wider reach, but I guess the East Otago Taiapuri has been the focus for this Pāua restoration work for many years now. It's an area just north of Dunedin. It covers a 25-kilometre stretch of coastline, including the areas around Kiritane, Warrington and Waikouaiti. And the Taiapuri has this special relationship with Pāua. Pāua is a taonga with a long history of use, and the decline of Pāua in the area was, I guess, one of the motivations for the creation of the Taiapuri in the first place. It was noticed by a number of Kaumātua from Katihurapa ki Pukataraki that Pāua stocks weren't doing particularly well in the area, and it was these concerns that helped sort of motivate people to get behind the creation of the taupiri initially. And with this decline has been this huge sense of loss for customary fishes, given its significance. And the committee have adopted a very active approach to its management in the area, what can be described as a learning by doing approach in terms of the regulations that have been put into place to help sort of reverse the decline and restore the species for the future. And so these management actions can be sort of summarized very nicely in this timeline here in terms of the actions that have been taken in terms of regulation. So in 2008, the first set of scientific surveys, I guess, were done. They were led by Chris Hepburn, and basically these surveys just reinforced what people had been observing and what the community had been observing, that the Pāua weren't doing particularly well, and particularly the area around Huriawa Peninsula, which is of significance, that there less than 1% of the Pāua were found to be of legal size. And so this prompted the first steps to regulate its take. There was initially a voluntary rahui in 2009 around Huriawa Peninsula, and then this was given legal force in 2010. Following on from those very first surveys in 2008, there have been a series of surveys that have since been completed. So in 2012, 2016, and most recently in 2021. And what these surveys have indicated basically is that there is a continued decline in the wider Taupiri area, although around that Huriawa Rahui, things have stayed somewhat stable, perhaps not improving as well as we might have hoped, but that the decline, at least in that area, has sort of stopped. But all these surveys have basically helped support the decision for closing the Pāua fishery in the Taupiri area, and so that's the current state as of 2019. Taking Pāua is prohibited in that area, unfortunately. And so, like I said, Pāua management in the Taupiri area is reflective of the community responding to local change in a timely and adaptable way, in a learning by doing approach. And I guess the approach that has been used uses a whole range of knowledge sources, so ecology, Mātauranga, and local knowledge. One of the cool things about the way the species is being managed in the Taupiri is that it's very much local scale management, which is relevant to the ecology and the biology of Pāua. It's a very local species. It changes on a reef to reef scale. So in terms of managing it for it to be ecologically relevant, the small scale approach is very much the way to go. And what you can also see in East Otago is community buy-in, at least in terms of engaging with reseeding activities and keeping an eye on stocks in the area. So even when we go down to the beach to try and do some research work, you'll get people in the area coming down to the beach to speak to us, to let us know that the Pāua fishery is closed, which is awesome to see that people are engaged with the management action in the Taupiri. So along the way, in terms of helping to support the management action that's occurred in the Taupiri and supporting the management committee, there has been a fair bit of Pāua-related research. This relationship, I guess, started with Chris and his postdoc back in 2008, and since that point, there have been a number of students that have come through from the university who have studied Pāua. I guess the Taipuri is, in a way, a kohanga for researchers. It's an amazing place to learn and to work, facilitated by a very supportive community. And so this is just a snapshot of some of the work that has been done mostly around 2010 to about 2013 there. There were a fair number of us who came through as students to look at various aspects of Pāua ecology. And since that point, there have been multiple groups of undergraduate students and graduate students that have done Pāua research. So in terms of the restoration project under CPSS, it's called Pāua Restoring a Cultural Icon for Future Generations. And it has sort of three main components. The first is monitoring. So monitoring the current state of play in terms of densities and abundance of Pāua. And this builds on the monitoring program that has been in place in East Otago since 2008. The second sort of component is stock enhancement research, so looking at reseeding and translocation as tools to enhance the fishery. And then the third is looking at strategies for reopening the fishery. So as I said, since 2019, the fishery has been closed, and we're sort of looking at ways in which perhaps the fishery could be reopened so that those connections to this valuable taonga are restored. So in terms of monitoring, that first component, so this is an example of the monitoring that has occurred in the Taipuri. So the purpose is to track the size and density of Pāua across a number of sites. And basically this is then used to help inform management initiatives. So what is the effect of the rahui in certain areas? Is reseeding going to have an effect? Is this going to then improve the fishery? And so the way we normally go about it is we have a number of transects. We roll out a 30-metre transect line, pull out a 1 metre squared quadrats, and we go through and we count and measure all the Pāua that are in these areas. We then also characterise habitat, look at substrate, and basically paint a picture of what's going on. In East Otago, these surveys have occurred 4 times, like I said, and has helped inform some of the management action. So in terms of the CPSS project, we will continue this monitoring in East Otago, but we'll also look to redo surveys in other areas like Mauraki and Kaka Point, where these surveys have occurred before. And if we can support monitoring at Whareponga as well, I know there's been murmurings of this as a result of the recent trip up north as well, would love to do that as well. So I guess we'll just have to see where that goes. And so one of the students who's involved with this project, Louise Bennett-Jones, is a PhD student here in the Department of Marine Science. So she led out on the 2021 monitoring in the East Otago Taipuri. Unfortunately, the 2020 survey got COVIDed, like a lot of field work that year, and so, but she was able to lead out in the survey in 2021, and alongside a number of Aquifer 301 students was able to get the survey completed. And so that paints a picture, provides us with data for in terms of tracking what is happening in the Taipuri since the last survey was completed in 2016. Louise has also been involved with a translocation. There'll be some images of that coming up soon as well that occurred, I believe it was in 2020. So she's been looking at different tools for restoring Pāua, and is currently interviewing tangata tiaki to look at the use of maramataka and how it could be used to help manage Pāua fisheries in the area. So a lot of work associated with this project. In terms of the second component, we're looking at stock enhancement, so reseeding. You can see here a series of images, which I guess is the dream, the goal. So you take your adult Pāua, these Pāua were at Warrington, you bring them back into the lab, induce them to spawn, and then hopefully create thousands and thousands of little baby Pāua that you can then reseed back into the environment. Unfortunately, Pāua around East Otago are either very, very stubborn or very, very secretive, because I guess we've been trying to induce Pāua to spawn and to set up this reseeding program for a couple of years, and it hasn't quite been able to take off, but we're hopeful that with this round of research that we'll be able to crack their secrets and get them to spawn and create these reseeds. And so instrumental to this part of the program is Adam Brooke, pictured here, gazing lovingly at this Pāua. He is, I guess, leading the charge in terms of trying to get these animals to spawn. He has set up our system in the hatchery at the Portobello Marine Lab, which is where they'll be housed and where they'll be hopefully growing. And he's also been spending a lot of time with me lately out in the field as we swim about various locations in the Taipuri looking for adult broodstock to bring back and spawn. What we're looking for are adults that are showing signs of gonad development. So if you lift up their foot a little bit, you'll start to see a little bit of a bulge, as it were, when they're coming time to reproduce. And so it's an exercise in patience, an exercise in resilience, perhaps, especially as the water starts to get colder, but a bit of time going out in the water and looking for suitable broodstock so that we can bring them back and get them to spawn. So the second part of the sort of stock enhancement component is looking at translocation, so moving Pāua from areas where they're perhaps vulnerable to environmental change and placing them in areas where they were historically fished, for example. We have an example of this work from 2020 from Louise's PhD work. We moved 420 Pāua from reefs at the southern end of the Taipuri to reefs further north, and then assessed how they got on. The idea behind this was sort of twofold. The first was to move them from reefs where they were at risk of being buried by sedimentation, and then the second purpose was to see if they would maintain their aggregations so that they could perhaps have a chance of breeding when they're in the aggregations. And so this is a tool that we would look to investigate more as well. In this particular example, the Pāua moved quite quickly. So within a week of being translocated, the Pāua had sort of dispersed quite far and wide. But we did learn a lot about the process from this particular study, and we would look to do so again. So we have had discussions about doing a translocation at East Otago in the depths of winter. Louise's one was done in summer, which was quite pleasant, but to sort of assess the effects of moving them in winter to see if they would stay put. If they were moved in winter, we're going to do a winter translocation, and then perhaps working with Mauraki as well, we'll look to do a translocation there as well. And so we have another student, Duncan Campbell, who's doing his honours looking at aspects of translocation, and in particular he's looking at the effect of lunar phase on Pāua movement and translocation success. So he's another student who is funded by CPSS. And he's just started in the last couple of weeks. He started with the full moon, looking at how Pāua that are taken from the wild and how they move relative to moon phase. I'm not sure whether he has any very preliminary results just yet, but it's exciting to see the Pāua scooting about the tanks, I think, and so this will help inform some of the translocation work that will come later on in the year, because there is believed to be a relationship between lunar phase and Pāua movement, and so I guess we just want to investigate that a little bit as well. And so the third component is looking at strategies for reopening. It sort of combines a fishing model that was created as part of the Vision Mātauranga Placement that used 10 years of Pāua data from the East Otago Taupiri. So it'll use that model to help test different management scenarios within the area. So based on, I guess, the directions of tangata tiaki and what the community want in terms of harvest scenarios, we will test them both with the model and then test them in the field. And this sort of, I guess, experimental fishery, you can call it, will be authorised by tangata tiaki, and which is a really exciting part of the story as well, that you're seeing this return to, I guess, customary I guess, control, as it were, of the fishery, because they'll be the ones that are authorising the take of Pāua in this area. And this will be supported by continued monitoring. So again, that first component will be an important part of this as well. And so related to this aspect of the work, we have a PhD student, Finn Ryder, who's looking at drivers of population dynamics and the fishery status of blackfoot Pāua. Now, he hasn't worked exclusively in the East Otago Taupiri. He did a study also in Paraki Bay, up in Banks Peninsula. But in terms of its relationship to this third component, he's going to be completing some wading surveys to look at the depth profile of Pāua in a number of sites around the Taupiri, and he's currently got a series of loggers out. You can see a picture of one here to look at some of the oceanographic conditions in some of these Pāua areas to sort of see the relationship between these fine-scale oceanographic conditions and Pāua abundance. There's one other student who's involved in research that falls under the Pāua Restoration Project, and that's Josh Percy. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of Josh. I'm going to have to try and sneakily take one when he's not looking the next time he's around. But Josh is starting a master's this year, looking at the relationship between some of these key species, so Pāua, the seven-armed sea star, Astrostole scabra, and the Cook's turban, Cookia sulcata. And this will also provide us with some ecological information that will help in terms of looking at different management strategies. Things like understanding the relationship between the seven-armed sea star and Pāua is important when you go to translocate, which is something we learned through Louise's work. You don't really want to be translocating or reseeding individuals in areas with high abundance of these sea stars, because your individuals won't last very long. And so understanding these interactions are all very important for the sort of long-term restoration focus for this project. In terms of outreach, we have some exciting Pāua programs that are starting with the New Zealand Marine Sciences Centre, the Study Centre. I think they're actually lined up to begin fairly soon. And so their extension and enrichment programs for Year 9 and 10 students are going to be focused on Pāua this year. So we're going to look at, I suppose, different aspects of their ecology, their biology, as well as some of the social and cultural values associated with Pāua as well. So that's really exciting and something to look forward to in the rest of the year. And we'll also be developing some resources for teachers for them to take Pāua-related activities back into the schools to teach them about the species, as well as fisheries management. Now, I was told about 20 minutes talking, so I feel like I'm sort of getting to the end of that, so I'm being on there. But before I stop talking, I guess, I just want to acknowledge a few people. So I found this picture in a report from the East Otago surveys from 2021. I don't know where Lucy got it from, but it's one of the earlier photos, at least for me as a researcher working in the East Otago Taupiri, and it sort of shows some of the key people that have been involved in Pāua restoration in the area for some time. Some are also missing. I don't see Brendan there, although he might be that person in the wetsuit there. But this was my first, I guess, foray into this world as a master's student. You can see me here with these dove booties and rolled up Canterbury pants, and I'm not sure what kind of hat I've got on, but yeah, aside from my poor fashion sense, for me, it sort of started the beginning. It was the beginning of this amazing journey into research in this sort of setting. There are people here who have been my mentors and supervisors and colleagues and friends for years. So there's Nigel Scott from Te Rūnanga Ngāi Tahu, there's Anne-Marie Jackson, there's Chris Hepburn. Like I said, Brendan's not there. He's either the person in the wetsuit or he's probably in the water doing some work. And then also missing from this image is Pritchie. And these people have helped guide me personally, as well as Pāua research in this area for a very long time. So I feel like they should be acknowledged. I think this photo was taken perhaps from a wānanga where we had kaitiaki from other areas visiting as well. And we were just sort of talking about Pāua in general. And then additional to them, there have been a number of people from those in the Taipiri Committee and the Karatane Whānau who have been hugely supportive of this work, and no doubt will continue to be supportive of this work into the future, as well as others who have supported this work as well. So I think I'll stop there. And obviously I'm happy to take any questions.
Karawi Gaya, that was an excellent presentation, and yes, that photo at the end was certainly a throwback. I think I had some questionable fashion choices on there also, but no, that what a wonderful presentation. And building off from Rose as two of the projects that sit within our restoration theme, which of course focuses on acknowledging the past, uses knowledge of the present and future to guide action that provides meaningful benefits today and for generations to come. And so I think hearing the journey of where you've come from, where you're leading this project in now, and the new areas that you're leading into, and with the students that you have as well, it's exciting to see, you know, still very much at the beginning of it, where you're wanting to take this project within the wider context of the restoration theme, and of course the whole core, which is exciting. So let's open it up for questions too. So people, you can click off your videos if you want to now, or if people want to, and just either use the chat function or raise your hand. And if you have any questions for Gaya. Kia ora. Questions, comment, etc. All welcome.
Go on, Chris.
All right, I've raised my hand. Yeah, that was a great photo. And that was, we had a wānanga, and there's some other people there like Joe Wakefield, who was a really significant figure in Ngāi Tahu, still is, and did a lot of work in the Ministry of Fisheries, and John Henry, who went through the Southeast Marine Protection process with me, and much boredom. So some real superstars of tangatiaki, and I just had a terrible haircut back then. I was just outside before Gaya and having a look at just the scale of what you're doing. I'm just wondering how the Pāua's looking at the moment, and I'd just say it's just terrific to have you on board as a colleague at our department, and all the work you're doing, and also actually bringing someone with a bit of intellectual firepower into this area, because it's great. You know, they kicked you out of the country to go go to Old Dominion, but you came back with some amazing skills. So there is a question there. It's good on you, Guy. You're a legend. And how's it going with those bulging gonads?
So I guess for the bulging gonads, yeah, we've been keeping a close eye on things because we don't know a heck of a lot about what the Pāua are doing around here. They're quite secretive. So we've been going out since the start of May every week, and things are looking promising as far as we can tell. Like they're getting, let's just say Adam and I haven't seen them as bulgy as they have been in our years of working with them. So yeah, we're hopeful, and we'll continue to go out and monitor them, I guess, for the next few weeks, hopefully, until we find some that are good to go. Because this is sort of par for the course for a number of Pāua around the country. We spoke to guys from Canterbury University who said the same thing, that to find suitable broodstock, you have to be vigilant, you have to go out and you have to keep checking and keep checking. So I guess it's just the approach that we have to take until we find suitable breeders.
Kia ora, Jess. Great talk, thanks, Gaya. So I have a question. This year is, of course, the first year that Aotearoa celebrates Matariki. Too is a public holiday. Have you, within some of the student work that's been coming, that I know many are in the early stages as well, are you starting to find interesting connections, of course, and with Matariki and the wider knowledge around our celestial beings, let's say, of which, of course, the moon is a big part of that with our lunar calendars? Are you starting to find some interesting insights into the work that you're doing and your students as well?
I have to be honest, we haven't, I don't think, thought too much about Matariki yet. I know you can't sort of separate these celestial bodies so much, but definitely something to look into. I do know that the first night of Duncan's experiment, there happened to be a lunar eclipse. So I did tell him to record that. He was just like, oh dear. So it would be interesting to see if that had any unusual effects on terms of what the Pāua were doing that night. So yeah, something definitely to think about as we continue on with this part of the research. Yeah, it's still very early days in terms of looking at lunar influences in the Maramataka.
I think that's a super exciting part of the work, and a big focus in the core is us being able to push collectively into the new areas. So it's super exciting where you're going, and of course Matariki will rise in the Tangaroa moon phases too, so that'll be interesting to see what the Pāua are up to in that time, as we try to reclaim some of that knowledge and to share that wider is really cool. Over to you, Kim.
Thanks, kia ora koutou. That was a fantastic talk, Guy. Not only what you talked about, but actually the way you talked about it. I really enjoyed the way you presented this, and that's pretty inspiring for me. But my question is pretty specific, really, and a bit about my lack of knowledge of such ecological things. But you've been pretty careful to keep the collecting of the Pāua, the broodstock and the translocation within the Taipuri area, and I was wondering about how sort of locally, how local you have to keep things, and that is there the opportunity to look, further afield, or what kind of factors do you think about when you are looking at a really specific area?
So I guess the reason for focusing on the Taipuri exclusively is twofold. So yes, they do vary very much on a local scale, and there's been past research from tag recapture studies, for example, that show that even within the Taipuri, they will grow at different rates. So it is a very, very local, they have their life history on a very local scale. So in terms of keeping it within the Taipuri, I think it's quite relevant in that we wouldn't necessarily have to go further afield to do certain things. And then the second part of that is just related to supporting the community and what they want to achieve for their Pāua fishery. So that's why we're working exclusively within the taipuri, because it's supporting their management goals. That's not to say that we wouldn't necessarily want to do Pāua restoration in other parts of Otago or other parts of New Zealand. It's just for this particular project, the focus is very much on the taipuri and supporting the community.
So just to follow on that a little bit, if you have trouble inducing spawning from these Pāua, is there many disadvantages of taking Pāua from another area where it's more easy to spawn, but then you've got, maybe you get the spawning, but you've taken them from another place?
Yeah, so Pāua around Marlborough, for example, are known to be quite a bit more reliable. They'll spawn year on year. And so I guess if you wanted to, you could theoretically take them from Marlborough, bring them down and spawn them and then release them. But I think there is a sense of wanting to have local individuals that spawn that then reseed the local individuals as well. Part of it also comes down to being locally adapted to conditions here. In terms of the genetics, there has been some genetic work that has been done that shows that there are some variations, but not a huge amount of variation across the board. So in terms of genetic diversity, perhaps there's less of an issue, but I think it's just this, there are certain elements that would make it important to keep them to this area, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Chris and or Bridie.
Hey, thanks. I've got a question here for you, Gaya. So like firstly with the kukea, they're a bit more of an active grazer, eh? And I know here in Wellington we don't have many left, but they used to be a bit of a worry here for the Pāua here. But I was going to say, for in terms of the spawning problems, is that because there's some sort of stress around the taipuri, or like sedimentation, for example? Or do you think that there's something else going on? Is it just the population?
We really don't know. They are spawning in the wild, we do know. So for the last couple of years, I think 2021, 2020, when we were doing the Pāua surveys, Louise in particular would come across little baby Pāua at certain locations. So they're definitely breeding in the wild. We just haven't been able to find the brood stock to then get them to spawn so we can give them a helping hand. Maybe that's them telling us that they don't need a helping hand, but it's, yeah, so it's not that they won't breed, it's just that I guess we're not capturing them at the right moment. It could also be part of the problem is we don't know how much gonad development is required for us to spawn them. So maybe these individuals will only visibly get to half a stage of development and then they'll spawn. And so we could take them at that point and spawn them and be successful, but we don't know. Like the sort of general advice for people trying to raise Pāua around the country is you get them as, I was going to describe them in a terrible way, as big and bulgy as possible, and that sort of guarantees your success. So that's what we're aiming for, but maybe these ones don't ever get to that point and they'll just spawn anyway. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question there.
No, that answers it. It's real interesting. It'd be good to hear and see what happens with this project. Thanks, Guy. Really good talk. Cheers.
Kia ora, Chris. So we've got some more comments coming through here in the chat there, which you can see. Gaya from Naomi, Ngāi Tahu talk. Great presentation, Gaya, learned a lot. And from Josh, awesome talk from Gaya. So do we have any other questions or comments? Awesome. Well, let's oh, yep, you've got one. Go, Chris Hepburn.
Well, I might as well just ask one other thing. Hey, Naomi, things went real well up at Whariponga. We missed you. Hopefully you're feeling a wee bit better. Hey, how have you found working in the core? And because you're just talking to Chris and stuff and those other research themes and, you know, Rob Smith floating around it and those different things. Is that useful? Where you're finding those links happening and you know, because I see some of the stuff with what Finn's doing. I think that's come from Rob's technology. So how's that all been?
Yeah, no, I think the collaborations as you can describe them, have been awesome, and we're learning a lot from colleagues, but I think we could do more. Like sometimes I feel like we're in a little Pāua silo, and so that's probably on us to try and branch out and to learn from others a lot more as well. So hopefully that'll develop as the project goes on. Like I'm really looking forward to working with Bridie and Chris Cornwell on the stresses stuff. If we get Pāua to spawn, then there's a little baby Pāua that can go into their project as well. And then also doing some of the monitoring work alongside that tumu with Pritchie and Kim Curry as well. I think there are some awesome linkages there as well. We just need to be a bit more active with getting those going. So yeah.
Kia ora, Matt.
Hey guys, great talk, Guy. Yeah, I've just got a quick question about, I guess, expectations of restoration, and how productive do you think these systems could be, and how many could you be producing on a year-by-year basis? I guess it's early days yet, but when you get into, say you have success, what are you looking at producing in the system that you've set up so far?
So we're currently scaled pretty small, because obviously we want to get them to spawn, and we want to make sure we can, I guess, crawl before we can walk, essentially, just because we've struggled to get them to spawn before. But our current capacity is, I think it's up to 20,000 in the V tanks that we have, and there's space there to expand. So we're starting small, just so that we know what we're doing, and that we can, in terms of even outplanting, there's a lot that we don't know about the best ways to outplant these little babies. So there's the capacity to grow, but we're starting fairly small. Yeah, I mean, I should have put a little clip in there actually of the V tank. So a V tank is shaped like a V, as it's described, where the little baby Pāua will settle out, and then they grow to maybe 10 to 20 millimeters in this tank. And we managed to grab one from Shane at the old Kiratane Pāua hatchery, and we've plumbed it in at PML. Adam's done a great job of doing that, and it looks like a massive spa bath, but the tank itself is huge, so it has a lot of capacity for growing little baby Pāua in it. So we just need to get them to spawn, and then we'll be going.
Awesome. Any other questions? That's a thumbs. Cool. Got some thumbs up coming around. Oh yes.
Oh yeah, kia ora. Oh, that was supposed to be a raised. That was supposed to be a raised hand.
Cool.
Got my emojis mixed up. Yeah, awesome kōrero, Gaya. I was just thinking, and I guess a question there, you know, around that earlier reseeding that took place about 2016, and I know this is probably a question for many people, but just in terms of the information that was gathered then around the DNA and is there potential in this project to perhaps look if there was actually any success in that earlier reseeding, or if that's something that you've sort of planned to look at perhaps now or down the line in terms of identifying those Pāuas that were put in 5 or 6 years ago?
That's a good question. We hadn't really thought to do that. I mean, that genetic information must exist somewhere. It came out of Tasman's Masters, right, and was helped by Tom McCown, so that data is there. It would be an interesting exercise to see if those reseeds have gone somewhere, whether the adults that are now in those locations are the adults that were originally reseeded. So there is the potential to do that. I guess we should have a chat about whether that's something you'd like us to do, and we could certainly look to do that. And I guess I'm not a geneticist, and I tend to sort of, as soon as I see genetic stuff, I tend to run in the opposite direction. But I would say that there are people who are associated with the core who have that type of knowledge. And there have been advances too from when Tom and Tasman did that work to now that could potentially be used for this as well. So yeah, something to think about. Yeah.
Mate, good job, mate. Thank you.
Kia ora, Hanarangi.
Kia ora. I just had to say something. My family absolutely kind of grew up around Pāua, and I'm wondering whether there is any work being done in terms of hapu development, and I think Karetane is just an awesome kind of template for a lot of our people further north. They have a lot of stories, like I know my uncle has a lot of stories around the Pāua, and I'm wondering whether that's being picked up at all through the mahi that you do. So that's my first kind of thought. The second thought is I'm really keen to know whether there's any international collaborations with the issues that you're having now. Are those issues prevalent across the globe? You know, do they have similar issues in terms of problems with Pāua? And you know, anyway, that's my whakaaro. Kia ora.
Thanks, Hanarangi. And so for your first question in terms of drawing on some of the knowledge from other hapu and taking this research further afield, it's something we would like to develop. And I guess that's in terms of establishing those relationships, it's something that we would want to do. And if we can do that through the core, we would love to do that. So I think, yeah, all for that. So would hopefully like to do that. And then in terms of talking internationally, so abalone around the world are in decline in many areas. It's a species, or there are many species that have just been overfished. And so some of the issues around overfishing, reseeding, trying to find broodstock, they exist around the world. And so there are a number of, I guess, researchers and communities that are also trying to actively restore. We haven't engaged with any so far, but I guess that would be something that we could look to do if we wanted to learn from some of these other places. But yeah, a lot of these issues are global for abalone fisheries around the world. It's just unfortunately species that people love a little too much.
Great questions, Hanarangi. And that's, of course, we are a national core, and as we have our projects get to grow and bring others in and draw on those within already, are the things that we get to have a good think about. Kahununu, of course, springs to mind. A very, very important stories in Kahununu of the Pāua, as we have some work in those fields and in that region, and others as we merge together our understandings around our marine and wellbeing foci, of course. Let's give a round of applause to Gaya, too, whether that's in like this or with our thumbs up or our clapping emojis. Too, you've got quite a bit more positivity coming through here in the chat. Here we go. That was so good, Gaya. Always a legend. Kia ora, Lisa. And Danny, thank you. Goat in the boat. And whatever that may mean, which is awesome. Greatest of all time. And our next pū kōrero, let me just bring up the notes. Our next pū kōrero is as the team. So a big thank you to Hanarangi for putting all the behind the scenes with our administrative team for today. And next one is penciled in around on the 17th of June. And this will be, and they around our restoring theme. So with Rose, Gaya and others in the team around looking at the goals and aspirations of the restoration theme. And then we move into understanding a month later, and this information will come out too if it may be new to some of you, and the connecting after that too. So the idea is that we have a couple of speakers from each of the themes in a month, and then we wrap up with the particular platform theme leads, and then that takes us to the end of the year, which is kind of a scary prospect too. So a big congratulations to you. Well, and a wonderful presentation Gaya for today, and great to see so many people connecting in as well. And this is recorded too. And so when the day comes that we get to have our own website, that'll be loaded up on there, which is great. And so we'll have our karakia to close, and then wish everybody well on for the rest of the day, whatever may be in front of you. Ha te awa puti tua puti waho, I te paki ako o te rākau, o maere nuku, o maere raki, o maere o te māra whenua, I ruka tāne, I raro tāne, te raki ihi o tāne, paku paku o tāne, noho ka o te ariki, ho atu e tāne, ki uta. Kia ora everybody, thank you. Kia ora Gaya.
Kia ora.
Thanks, Gaya.